Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Alliance of Independent Authors Advanced Self-Publishing Salon with me, Joanna Penn, and Orna Ross. Hi, Orna.
Hi, Joanna, and hello, everyone.
Here we are again. And can you believe it? It's May, which means a third of the year has gone. It's
It's just
crazy, right?
crazy.
It,
Absolutely.
it is really mad. And I did this challenge on my podcast, where I'll challenge everyone here, which is that's a third of the year. Are you a third of the way through your creative goals for the year? And my answer to myself is no, it's not. And I think the thing is, because of course we've had a very difficult year, but last year, and then it feels like this year is also quite difficult, but you don't also at the same time want to write off this year too. So I don't know, that's how I'm feeling, which is it's a third of the year, got to get a grip.
I do think everything will be easier when life returns to something closer to normality, which here in the UK is pretty soon. So I'm counting on that anyway.
Yeah, but anyway, just wanted to encourage everyone. Well, today's theme is how to research your book, and we'll be looking at fiction and non-fiction because we both do a lot of research. But before we get into that, we're going to do our news. So, Orna, what's happening with Ally?
Ally Member Magazine is out, so I'd like to encourage everyone to log in and go. You should have had an email from us today, this morning, saying that it is there for you in your inboxes. And if you haven't had such an email, please do let us know, because we do rely on email for our member communications. And so if you've changed your address, or we don't have your most up-to-date address, we'd really like to know that. So yeah, that is there, and you do need to log in to see it, and you need to log in to see most of our benefits. So if you're not logging in, you're missing out. So usually use this opportunity of our quarterly communication, our quarterly member magazine, to encourage people to visit the member zone more often, because we're always updating and always adding services and things. And there are lots of really good features in the magazine, including one on launching a book, and 100 top tools for authors, and which have come through, recommended by our members, and lots of other things too, including the Audible Gate campaign and what's happening there and the latest on that. So and the other thing, we've had some nice wins on the Open Up to Indie author campaigns of late, and particularly wanted to mention that we can now upload our books, the British Library and the 6 libraries of record. We can now upload ebooks and don't have to send print books anymore. So again, would encourage, it was difficult to encourage our members when it meant sending off hardbacks and paperbacks and things. But now that it is ebook format, I think it would be really great to get all these good self-published books up there and out there onto, into the record. So and Arvin Foundation, which is fantastic foundation here in the UK, educational around writing and bits of publishing and marketing and stuff. All sorts of courses and all sorts of other good things have now finally kind of recognised the self-published contingent. And I'd like to do a shout out to member Melissa Addy, who worked on that particular one. So what have you been up to?
Last month I was in launch. This week the creative cycle turns again, and I'm back in research and the creative mode for my next nonfiction book, what I'm calling the Shadow Book, which is a Jungian sort of nonfiction book, and also Day of the Martyr, which will be my next arcane thriller. And it's funny, I was actually emailing with Kevin Tomlinson from Drafter Digital, who's also a thriller writer. He and I write in the same niche, and we were saying, how do you write a thriller when the whole world seems to be a thriller right now? It's like every time you have an idea, you think, oh, that's not fiction, that is happening. So it is an interesting time to write certain genres. But yeah, I mean, I trust the creative process. And I know, we've talked about this before, but the whole trusting emergence, and we'll talk about that when we come to research. I'm also in training for my next ultra marathon. Terribly type A of me. I can't just go for a walk. I have to go for a really long walk with someone with a timer. So, so but I'm getting out and about. I say the weather's getting warmer. It's actually a storm right here where I am in Bath. But getting out a lot more. I feel like the winter lockdown was pretty awful for many, many reasons, and I now need to get out more. I'm prioritizing healthy writer type activities. If there's a choice between sitting at my desk and doing some admin and going outside, that's what I'm doing after a winter shut in. So yeah. And what about you on a personal level?
Yeah, talking about the cycle, sometimes there are really big cycles that pass, and I feel like I'm in the middle of a really quite intense creative change. It's almost 10 years. Next year it will be 10 years of Ally, and it's moving into a new phase where it needs more people, and so I'm really doing lots of shifting around of my own creative process and of the process within Ally and the team and everything. Essentially looking at the next 10 years, not just year. Yeah.
Crazy.
I know. When we started, I didn't think in 10-year cycles, but I didn't think in quarters. I didn't plan really. I was a very sort of to just take it as it happens kind of thing. But the growth that self-publishing saw and that the Alliance has seen forced really me to become somebody who had to really engage with planning and stuff. So yeah, I just want to make sure that the next 10 years has plenty of room for writing and publishing personally. So doing a lot of kind of background work to make that happen. And just would like to say the creative self-publishing is available in ebook form, also in the member zone for members, and available for sale in the self-publishing advice shop as well.
And also you did a podcast, I think, with Sacha Black talking about the topics.
Yes, Sasha insisted on interviewing me.
Yes, she gazumped me. That's normally my job, but I thought she did it. So people listening on the podcast feed, you can find that interview with Orna just a couple of clicks down the list from this topic today. So definitely go listen to that, because I think it's so important. You and I have talked before. I mean, you and I, we're great friends, and yet we're quite different in the way we approach self-publishing, let alone how broad the church is in general. So I quoted a number of things from your book in my last book, How to Make a Living with Your Writing, because it has a completely different angle. So brilliant book. Go get it, everyone.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so let's get into the topic for today, which is how to research your book. But we're going to start with why research is so important anyway, because I feel like there's a bit of but you should create from your brain, like that's all you need is your brain, and here comes a book off the page. But Orna, why don't you start? Why do you think research is so important?
I have a quote there that I really like from Robert McKee, who's I think you've done his courses.
Oh yeah.
Famous
in screenwriting circles, really.
Screenwriting advice, exactly. And he has a brilliant book called Story, which I found really useful. And I often find screenwriting books are really good on story. And he has a great quote about research. Do research, he says, 2 words, it's an order. Feed your talent is the number one reason. And research not only wins the war on cliche, it's the key to victory over fear and its cousin, depression. And I think that kind of sums up the whole thing about research from me. But essentially, without going outside ourselves, we don't know where we fall in our own tradition. We don't know what's been done before, whether we're repeating something and maybe less well than somebody's already done it. And it's also really important, I feel personally, for filling the creative well. I mean, the idea that you would not research either fiction, nonfiction, or poetry sometimes. I mean, sometimes poetry is the exception, and it does just come kind of fully formed from the brain. But generally, from other reading or something else, there's no such thing as an original thought. And I think that's the very reason why research is so important.
Yeah, and for me, I think a lot of people say, "Oh, I've got writer's block," whereas actually, a lot of the time, it's because they don't know enough detail or they don't know enough about a situation. So, for example, Day of the Martyr, and I have a book title, and I know it will be about the relics of Thomas Becket, but I don't know enough about Thomas Becket and the medieval relics in the church and where they might be now. And so I might have an idea, but then I have to go find out the detail. And if I try and write that book from my own head, yeah, I might be able to write a bit, but could I write a whole novel? No, I couldn't. And certainly for nonfiction, I must read between 20 and 40 books per nonfiction title, sometimes many more. And for fiction, I probably read 10 to 20, about half. And they're usually history books and religious books and stuff like that. But to me, I just cannot even imagine writing a book without researching. And even things like fantasy. So I know people are like, oh, well, I'm writing about a magical kingdom. But as we know, one of the most famous fantasy series, I guess, George R. R. Martin, with what became Game of Thrones TV show, is based on history. And a lot of fantasy is taken from history. Tolkien was inspired by the Icelandic sagas and the Norse sagas and things like that. So don't be afraid to research. I think that's important. But Orna, what do you say to people who are worried about research in case they plagiarize or steal ideas, all of this?
Yeah, I just think it's a false fear, and I think it can really lead to cliche, because you think you're having an original thought, and then if you haven't researched it, you don't realize. The other thing that happens, I think, is the specific sort of details that make something ring true. You need to research to get that. I mean, I write historical fiction, so not researching is simply not an option. You absolutely have to. And if anything, the problem is something we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, which is about when to stop and not getting overloaded. But the other thing you hear writers talking about a lot is, the moment when it seems like the book got up and started to write itself. Ironically, that's what happens when the research is good enough, really, when you filled in enough of the details through research and working and thinking. Because research isn't just, and again, we'll talk about this in a minute, isn't just what you do in the library, it's also actively researching your imagination and your memory as well. So without that act, really, whenever you hear somebody talk about not wanting to research and wanting to just have this pure experience from the top of the brain, generally you're talking to somebody who hasn't finished a book, or is writing the same book over and over.
Yeah, I mean, how can you sustain it? Like, I'm up to 34 or something. Like, how do you sustain it? The other thing is, to me, it's like people say, oh, write what you know. And I don't even know where I heard it, but it's not write what you know, it's write what you're interested in. And, which is why a lot of my thrillers come back to religious relics, because I'm just totally like, I just can't find them interesting enough. So I'm always reading about religious relics and going, like, there's an exhibition at the British Library, British Museum coming up on Becket. And so for me, that write what you're interested in, that's what drives me to a book. So
write what you want to know.
Yes, write what you want to know and what gives you an excuse to research. So I think that moves us on into the next section, which is how to research. So why don't you start? Like, how do you research?
So I think of research as being divided in three in my mind. So there is research, of other books, if you like, what we typically think of as research. In the old days, what you'd kind of go off to the library to do, and now you go onto the internet to do as well. And you have a quote here, books are made out of books, by Cormac McCarthy, and I really love that. That's absolutely right. So there's that. And for me, that's all about good notes, really, just taking good notes. At the beginning, not knowing where you're going with it necessarily, watching for that tug of interest that sometimes is mysterious, and at the same time, actually looking up stuff that you need to know. And then there is the research of the memory, which for me, I activate through free writing. I sit down and actively ask myself the question, how does this book connect to something that's happened in my memory? Because generally, if we want to write a book, there is something in there from way back when that interests us. And again, looking for that kind of tug of energy that tells you there's something going on there. But free writing very often generates a lot of material. So I'll just keep writing as fast as I can, not necessarily knowing what's going to come out of the memories. And then I also do what I think of on a day, not all together, these are all in different days, research of the imagination, again using the free writing technique, where I'll actively go in and kind of think my way into the character's actual sensory experience. So go through a day in their life, or a scene that I already know is going to be in the book. Some of these details do make their way into the book, not all do, and you have to, I think, not worry too much about waste at the beginning and just get whatever you get. And then there is a logical kind of sorting process that happens in the writing.
Yeah, I don't do that at all. So this is
exactly.
what's so great. Yeah, I mean, it's just not that. But I do agree with this. I think this tug of interest or curiosity, I think that is so key, and I feel like it's something we lose touch with. I certainly felt that I wasn't creative, when I had a day job back in the day in IT, and I didn't know what I was curious about. Like, I knew I liked reading thrillers to sort of drown my day job at lunchtime and on the train, but I didn't know what might interest me about things to write about. And tapping into that curiosity is a muscle. Like, you have to learn it and trust it over time, and when you feel it, you have to go with it, because there will be something there. It might take years. Like, I've got some, like this shadow book, for example. I've been thinking about this since I first studied Carl Jung back when I was sort of 19. So, this is a long time coming. But in terms of, back to research, you mentioned the books there. I do a couple, like you and I met in the London Library.
Yes.
Do you remember, like in 2012, we actually met on Twitter, everyone. We are classic. Friendship started on Twitter and continued in the London Library when we just bumped into each other. And I used to go to the London Library and pull, get books from the stack. And now I tend to order a lot of them. And I order physical books a lot of the time that just tug at me. And then I have them on my shelves. And a lot of them are very visual books. So, for example, I'll buy, books from museums with lots of images in. And that really sparks things. I'm quite a visual writer, but certainly, obviously, online libraries and things like that, or even using things that are in the other books like Frankenstein, Mary Shelley. A lot of people are riff off that. Or I'm just reading a feminist version of Beowulf at the moment. Have you seen this? It's just come out.
No.
It's just come out. So they've taken Beowulf, obviously, which is way out of copyright, like 1,000 years out of copyright, and riffing off that. So that's another way of using a book. Or I wrote 1,000 Fiendish Angels off Dante's Inferno. So it's actually taking a book and mining a book for ideas. But again, those are all out of copyright. And we're going to come to citations and things like that. But what about nonfiction, Orna? What do you do for nonfiction?
Well, obviously that does tend to happen much more in the first, the number one, which is the researching all the books kind of thing. I think it's important, as well as thinking of books, there are lots of other ways that you can get the kinds of details that you're looking for. So documentary, TV, podcasts. There are lots and lots of ways of finding what you need to know. And I generally begin a nonfiction book with some intensive Google research, just search engine research, see what comes up. Blog posts are really, really useful as well. And yeah, for back to fiction again, one of my main sources as a historical novelist is local newspapers, and they're really, really good for getting the tone and the voice, the sound of the period, as well as the strange, weird and wonderful things that happened that are slightly different from our time, that really bring a period alive. So research for me is not a hugely organized process. I really do follow it pretty organically, especially at the beginning. I have to completely tame myself. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but I use Evernote. And because Evernote has such a good search function, I can find what I need to find. And that just changed my life, because before that I used to drown in notebooks and was forever flicking forwards and backwards trying to find things. So yeah, I think that's the main thing to say, is that it's organic. I follow the feeling, and then as the book gets more advanced, then you're into filling the gaps, which is very specifically going to look for a particular fact or figure or something.
Okay, well, some of the other things I do, certainly documentaries, films, YouTube videos, for example, End of Days. I watched loads of Appalachian snake handling church videos, and I wrote a whole scene, but like literally I will just type out what I hear, what people say, and I'll use the way they speak in as dialogue and description. Like I just describe the church on the screen in front of me, which I think is fascinating. And then news, I read a lot of news. I just can't seem to break the addiction. I read a lot of different newspapers, and the map of the impossible came from the discovery of a map on the wall of an Egyptian tomb, and it was laid out like an adventure, like an actual map. There were these certain big bat things, and then there was a snake thing, and then there was this, and they had to get through. I was like, that's the plot of a sort of a journey through the underworld. And so I nicked that. You can definitely nick plots from the walls of Egyptian tombs. There is nothing wrong with that. And then also travel, obviously not something. This is the reason I'm writing a book about Becket, because the only place I've been in the last year is Canterbury, which is where he was martyred. But most of my fiction is based on my travel. So my last novel, Tree of Life, we went to Amsterdam, and this is what I do. I go looking for a story. So we went to Amsterdam, and I thought I knew I would find an idea somewhere, and I thought it would be in this esoteric library that Dan Brown had been to, and I was like, oh, I'm bound to find an idea there. But no, after that we went to this synagogue, a Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, and I was like, what is this? How is there a Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam? That question, why is this? And they had a book there called Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. And I was like, this is the story, like seriously. And so I bought the book, and I bought it, and then apologies to them, I had to burn it down in my book. But definitely, like, I would say 90% of my fiction is based on places I've actually been. And like my whole Map Walker series was based on walking past a map shop here in Bath and then kind of going from there. So that is really important to me. Now, I realize that's not for everyone, because I'm very lucky and I'm able to travel. But I feel like watching documentaries, YouTube, books, Google Maps can actually help you in other ways to see details, for example.
I think back to that point of everybody being so different. I mean, you mentioned news media there. For me, that just leaves me completely cold. It has to have happened it has to be yesterday's news before my imagination is activated. I don't know why that is, but that just is.
Ancient Egypt, Orna.
Yeah.
To be fair.
Yeah, no, I get it. But what I'm saying is my imagination wouldn't be activated by a modern news story, or modern news media. It just doesn't, even though I would see a story like a little thing that happened in a courtroom or something, and I would say that's a really great novel plot, but it would never go anywhere.
Yeah.
It's something about the past needs to happen. The other thing that I find really good, and I think you said you don't like to do, is interviewing people. So I will actually, and almost everybody.
Talk to anyone? Oh.
Yes, I like talking to people. So pretty much everybody will give you an interview if you want to talk to them about their favorite topic. Is my experience. They just love doing that, and it nearly always yields something that you wouldn't get yourself any other way, I feel. And also I think what happens for me in conversations is the things that people don't want to talk about, the kind of the gaps or the secrets or the things that are too painful to discuss, maybe, then I'm off. So I think the point is you have to do whatever activates your imagination. It's not as simple as just get the facts. thoughts. Something else has to be going on for it to be something that's going to have the energy to take you through the writing of it, turning it from just an experience or an interesting thing into something that's going to fuel a whole book.
Yeah, and just one more thing. So I don't like talking to people, but I do surveys. So I did a survey for The Healthy Writer, and a lot of quotes went into the book. I did a survey for How to Make a Living with Your Writing, and again, quotes into the book and inspires other chapters. And of course, I get permissions and everything, and I quote people and I put them in the acknowledgements and all of that. So you can definitely do surveys if you have an audience that you're writing for, like I do. And what I'm going to do this with the shadow book. Once I know what I'm doing, I will do another survey to get more ideas, because people often have ideas that you don't have and they're very happy to share. So I think that's another way to do it if you're introvert like me and don't want to actually talk to anyone.
Definitely don't neglect your own community. Sometimes we can forget what a rich source it is, and certainly the ally books will be nothing without ally members. I mean, they're just absolutely packed with member testimony, and so it's important to remember that.
Okay, so briefly, like you mentioned that you use Evernote, and I tried Evernote. In fact, I still pay for it, I think, and I just can't use it. But I use notebooks, and I also use Scrivener. So Scrivener, I've got about 20 different Scrivener files right now of projects that I'm not actively working on, but ideas. And then I might just, for example, I watched a documentary a few weeks ago, and I wrote notes and I stuck them in Scrivener because I may or may not write that book. And those notes are there, so I might come back to it. But for me, it is Scrivener. I put it in the research folder, and then as what I do with every book I write, if it's Kindle, I highlight things and export the PDF and put that in Scrivener. If it's paper, I underline things and then I type up my notes, and we'll come to crediting in a minute. But I'm very, very careful with making sure I keep track of all my sources, and then I know if it's in quotation marks, then it is a quote, and if it's not in quotation marks, it's my thoughts about whatever it was. So you talked a bit about it. Is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of turning the research into words?
I think, again, just in terms of the research of memory and imagination, to have a capturing device, be it a notebook, be it Evernote or Scrivener or whatever, or both, because yes, I also use notebooks. But whatever you use to capture your research, keep it by your bed because I always get my best ideas when I wake up in the morning. So I need to keep it close. And I think that's, somebody gave me that tip years ago, and it was one of the best tips I ever got. So if it is a notebook, just have the notebook and pen by your bed, or if it's your phone, you can, put it into Scrivener, put it into Evernote, whatever it is. But to remember that sometimes, again, when it comes to the active research of the imagination, activating the memory, that is research also.
And I don't do that either. So I don't, but just to say to people, like it comes for me when I sit down to do my work at my desk rather than in the middle of the night or anything. So again, there aren't any rules about this. We're just sharing our experiences. Right. So big question. How much research do you need, and when do you stop? Over to you. What's your thought?
Oh, well, now I don't do what I do. I have to now be so strict with myself, because I started one of my past jobs. It was actually as a historian. So, I love research, in other words. And of course, research is easier, isn't it? It's much easier to kind of just enjoy going around reading other people's stuff and imagining this and that and the rest, and making notes, which don't have to be actually knocked into structured chapters and things. So I actually now have to have some sort of first draft in place before I let myself do the research, and I think, though, that this is not something I could have done at the beginning, but it's something that I'm trying to train myself into doing now. Because I just go too widely, and I forget what I'm there for, and I need to be put back in. So now I just have to some sort of first draft in place, not trying to go for tone, texture, anything like that, just trying to get plots and ideas, of knowing what's happening in the book, and then and only then turning to actually doing the research. So there's the research, I'm obviously talking about the ideas established. I know what I'm doing. You can't be completely black and white about these things. It's very organic. But the point being, you're either somebody who has to make themselves research, in which case stopping won't be a problem for you, and being too thin is your problem. I'm the opposite, and therefore I have to kind of limit what I do. I think it's easier to know, for me, speaking personally, it's much easier to know in poetry or in nonfiction when enough is enough. I just seem to have, I feel it, I know it. It starts to feel like, no, okay, that's enough of that. But with fiction, I can get totally lost.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, I feel with nonfiction, but like I said, what I know I've done enough when I know exactly what they're saying. So that the amount of underlining or the amount of highlighting will reduce with every book I write. So the shadow book, I now read about 15 books on the Jungian shadow, and now I'm like, yeah, I know what this is. And so now I'm looking at their references and finding other aspects from other books. But I feel like I'm getting into a point where I need to start writing more, and then I can maybe do some more research. But with fiction, I basically don't stop. I'm a discovery writer mainly. So like with this Day of the Martyr, Thomas Becket, I don't know what it is yet. It's not a historical novel about the murder of Becket. It's a modern day thriller that is somehow based around a relic. And so I've written a lot of relic thrillers before, so I need something new. But I know that by researching it, going into research in some way, I'm going to find an idea, but I will stop that kind of research once I actually get the story idea. And once I get it and I get a couple of key settings, physical settings, then I'll write some scenes, and then I'll do more detailed research. So for example, with Tree of Life, I had to research somebody running through the middle of downtown Rio de Janeiro, and figure out how they would get up to that big Jesus, Jesus the Redeemer, Christ the Redeemer on the hill. And so I had to, go into Google Maps and figure out all of that, the physical movements. And I didn't need to do that until I was writing that scene, and then I needed to do that. So for me, I feel like the research is on several levels. One is the big theme or the big story, and then at the bottom level, it's figuring out those little details as you actually write the chapters.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. And the more clarity you can get around, which of those you're working on, the better, to avoid the confusion factor. Yeah. So
Yeah.
In one, you're looking to activate, stimulate the imagination, and in the other, you're looking to get in and out as quickly as possible with some information, just to fill a gap or to give you a sense of some sort of sensory detail or whatever.
Yeah, and in terms of just when to stop, I would say if you don't know when to stop, word count may have something to do it. Like if you're looking to write a 70,000 word novel and you've got 70,000 words of research notes, I'd say you're probably on the wrong side of the balance.
I'd have 140,000.
Exactly. But I think, we've talked about starting energy. I feel like research is part of starting energy. It can be really great. And then the pushing through energy is stop researching and do the writing. And,
Yeah, absolutely.
We agree. We agree on that.
Yes, we absolutely agree on that part.
Amazing. Okay, so let's talk about crediting and attributing. So for nonfiction, for me, I never do anything academic-y or footnotey, because I feel like that just doesn't work for ebooks, and it definitely doesn't work for audiobooks. And I feel like people who at the moment are a little bit obsessed about footnotes and doing that kind of thing have not thought about the various ways that people read. And some of the worst, people try and sort of, even print books. Like I had a friend who had his whole story kind of had footnotes on every page. It was part of the device. And the thing is, how small people print traditionally published books or even indie books. If you print the font too small, your footnotes are even tinier. And it was just impossible for any person with normal vision to read. So for me, I don't do footnotes or indexing. What I do is in the appendix, I will have a list by chapter. In the ebook, I will hyperlink to a particular thing, and in the appendix, I will list the references by chapter. And then in the audiobook, I say you can get the appendices in a downloadable file if you go to this page. They don't have to put their email or anything, but it means that they can get that. And I also obviously put you can get all these other things as well. So I think to me that's the best way of doing it, but I realize that you're more au fait with more academic type of books. What do you think with nonfiction?
With nonfiction, yeah. Well, with every, what I would call, obviously, if you're talking about a scholarly academic text, then you're looking at your references are really key to the publication, because that's just how academic publishing works. So you have to have extremely careful footnotes and endnotes about not just the author name and the book title, but the year of publication, which edition it was, where it's published, all that kind of stuff goes into your endnotes. But for everybody else now, the great thing about having the internet is you can have very minimal kinds of references if they are completely necessary only, I would say, on average, how to nonfiction and so on. So obviously, if you're quoting somebody, then you need to let people know that you have quoted them and where they could find more from that quote, say. But you can make that really simple. I do my formatting, as I know you do, also with Vellum. And Vellum has an EndNote facility, which you can, just get your endnotes at the end of the chapter, which I think is a very much more friendly way to do it. And you just have a few endnotes on each, and instead of a lengthy attribution with everything at the end of the actual quote itself, just a discrete number. And if you want to follow it through, then you can. And I think that's what you're aiming to do, is just do two things: to credit the person whose words you have used, and if the reader wants to know more, just making it easy for them to do that. So obviously in ebooks, hyperlinks, great. The tricky thing then is getting your print references, which will have to be different in the print edition to work as print references, but keeping it really, really simple and recognizing that in the old days you had to give a whole load of information because you wanted to make sure that people found the right book, the right edition of the book, and all that kind of stuff. But these days with the internet, it's all much easier. So yeah, keep it simple, I would say.
Yeah, and I'd also say that you can credit ideas without having to have a direct quote. Like, for example, I might say, founder of the Alliance of Independent Authors, Orna Ross, talks about free writing as part of her creative process. And I haven't directly quoted you in that way, but I'm referencing you as the person with, and I know that's not your original idea either, but it's where I heard it from. And I think that's important too. I feel like people obsess about individual quotes, but it should also be the ideas that you might have heard from other people. And the other thing is there's nothing wrong with this. I feel like there's a resistance to that, but again, there's nothing new under the sun. We are taking ideas from around us and putting our own spin on them. And what I like about the indie author community, always have, is the generosity. And we quote each other, we list each other's books in our back matter, and in fact, I will email people and say, I want to quote you in my book. What have you got? Like, I got an early version of your creative self-publishing because I was like, Orna, I need to quote you in my book. Give me your latest book so I can quote you, because this is also part of our ecosystem. Because what happens is someone finds, my book, and then they say, oh, look, Joanna put this book was useful, and they go and buy that book. And as we've said, we're a self-sustaining industry. We want, people never just buy one book. They're going to buy loads of books. So what you want to do is kind of help other people through quoting them and referencing their work. So just in terms of fiction, I always do an author's note, and I include the books I've read, the places I went to, the exhibitions I've been to, and I may occasionally, Morgan Sierra might say, as so and so, as Carl Jung said, in a kind of pithy way, but normally there won't be any attribution within the text. It will be in the author's note. What do you do about fiction?
Yeah, acknowledgements, I think. But again, it's very difficult. It is a tricky thing, and it very much depends on the length of the book, the amount of references, the amount of research you've done, and also sometimes you don't know where your ideas came from. And sometimes you do, but sometimes you're carrying something and it's come to you, and it wasn't an official note. It's something you picked up somewhere along the way in other reading or whatever. I think the main thing is, if anybody has had a significant impact on your book, they do deserve that acknowledgement. And then the second thing is to keep in mind that the reader benefits. I think some writers sometimes think they have to, that it's almost like a sign of weakness. Like they have to have all the ideas themselves, or it's not a good book. And that's not true. It's actually the confident author has no problem crediting and giving credit where it's due, saying where they came across an idea. It might be a term. It can be, there are all sorts of ways in which we are nurtured and fed by other authors, and to acknowledge that as much as is possible. And also, readers love these background details. And you can also, if there isn't room in the book and you don't want to have pages and pages at the back of your book, you can have a page on your website where you go into considerable detail. I've seen lots of authors who really go into a lot of detail about their research on their own website, and if your reader likes that sort of thing, they really like it, so it can be a good way to do it too.
Well, it's kind of why I've started my Books and Travel podcast, is in order to bring that. Like, I did a whole show on Oxford, and I went to Oxford, and Morgan Sierra has an office in Oxford, and I feel like I'm bringing out my research more and more in writing stuff around my research, and I will probably be doing some nonfiction books around aspects of research, which we've seen. Like, for example, Neil Gaiman wrote a book on Norse myths. Val McDermid, who's a crime writer here in the UK, has a book on forensics. So you can turn your research into other products. I think that's actually important too. There are actually ways you can monetize it. One more question, we're almost out of time, which is, some people might be worried about using a quote from a book. Obviously fair use is when you can take for example, I might use one line quote from the Bible, even the NIV version, and say, okay, that's fine because it's one line in millions, whereas I won't use a one line from the lyric of a pop song because it's a very short thing and I'll get into trouble. So what do you think about that? How do we use quotes?
Yeah, it's laid out very clearly for us in copyright law. So both here in the UK and the US, it's called fair use in one place and fair dealing in another. I can never remember which is what, but it's made very clear to us what is allowable and what is not in terms of fair use. And essentially, you don't rip the heart and soul out of a work. As you said, if you were to take, 2 or 3 lines out of a song, then that's just probably not on, or a short poem. But if it's a longer piece of work, that's absolutely fine. So there's a bit of common sense here. And again, I think if you're keeping your two things of credit where credit is due and facilitating the reader, if you keep those two things in mind, then I think you won't go too far wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just generally, it's beware of poetry and lyrics, and you're probably fine with anything that's a full-length book.
Yeah, I think that's probably basically it. Rule of thumb. Yeah, and I do think that all this, there is a movement now with showing more research, and what you're talking about there in terms of showing more words you're going along. So am I, and so are authors. And I think this is part of the creator being the publisher, and the creator wanting to tip the hat at other creators. So in the same way that we as publishers are much more forthright in crediting the other creative professionals that helped to make the book, like the designers and the editors and so on, and being more public about our research is part of that movement too, I think.
Yeah, good stuff. Right. So anything else on research? I think that's probably it.
Yeah, just know when to start and know when to stop.
Yeah, and the book is the point. I mean, the research is super fun, but the book is the point. Okay, so next month we are in June. Can you believe it? We're going to do top 10 myths about indie authors and self-publishing, the myths that authors have about going indie, and also what traditionally published authors and the people outside our little niche think about us. So we're going to be talking, I guess it's a kind of mindset thing. And after both of us, what am I on? My 13th year now of self-publishing, a decade full time. And we both have a lot of experience of these myths. So anything else, Orna, for the next month?
No, just to say, if anybody has something that they're hearing that should be done or has to be done or is a way to do self-publishing and you have a question about that, please, send it through to us at info@allianceindependentauthors.org, and we'll include it in our list of myths and misunderstandings too, but yeah, there are a lot of people saying you have to do things, and generally speaking you don't. And that's the pleasure of being indie, so that's what we're going to be looking at
yes. So what we might, let's say we might include it. We won't definitely guarantee it will be included.
We won't include them all, and we'll be focusing on the main ones, obviously. But yeah, do let us know what you're hearing and what you're worried about, I guess.
Yeah, I think I've just been hearing some stuff lately and I'm like, I do not want this to be what we're known for. So yeah, looking forward to that. Next month we'll be live, I guess, on the first Monday in June, and then it will go out on the various streams. So I guess happy writing.
Yes, and happy publishing. Have a great month. Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.